and welcome you to our third in our webinar series about deep dives into food safety topics. I know many of us have taken food safety trainings over the years in different formats, so our goal with this is to just do some more in-depth, kind of look at some specific topics and hear from farmers about how they approach these topics on their farm to give some real kind of practical guidance and advice. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about vegetables and animals in terms of livestock and also wildlife and pets on our vegetable farms. Real briefly, just so everyone knows, you might have attended these before, but we work statewide with fruit and vegetable farmers on-farm food safety practices around the state. So we are based in the metro area, but do work statewide. So whatever kind of questions you have around good agricultural practices, FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, we partner with our partners at the Department of Agriculture Produce Safety Program to host those trainings. And we also offer technical support if you want a gap audit or any sort of other food safety questions like developing a food safety plan. We are here to help you. And we will be sending a notes page for this series after this training. And it has some of the links that we'll talk about today. So we won't necessarily be putting them in the chat so that you don't feel the need to spend time, cutting and pasting those. And here's our upcoming trainings. So you can see we've got them on Feb 28th, March 14th, March 28th, and April 11th. Good agricultural practices are kind of just that wide, broader area of on-farm food safety. So these are the things that farmers do, workers do, anybody who's harvesting, packing, storing fresh fruits and vegetables that we do to minimize the risk of microbial contamination, to prevent and reduce the potential for a foodborne illness outbreak from our farm. So that's what we're talking about today. And specifically, we'll talk about livestock and animals on the farm, some of the benefits and the potential risks, on-farm strategies to reduce those risks, harvesting, and kind of some strategies. Joel will talk through that, and then just time for your Q&A. So Joel, would you like to introduce yourself briefly? Do we have your audio?
Sure.
Thanks.
My name is Joel Barr, and I farm in Sandstone, Minnesota, and we have a diversified farm. So we do grass-fed finished beef and pasture-raised chicken and pasture-raised eggs, organic and soy-free. And then we do produce. So 4 different enterprises, both animals and crops. We're a very small farm. We only have about an acre of vegetables, very intensively managed, and about 40 acres of pasture. We employ a handful of people, and we do direct marketing to our customers. Probably about 80% are in the Twin Cities, and the rest are more local. Been farming for a little over a decade now. I started out on the East Coast managing another farm outside of DC, and then moved up here, started on rented land, and worked our way up to eventually buying our own land. And we've been on our own land for, I think this is our 4th year on our own land. So in that time, I've worked on a handful of different farms. I've started and restarted and moved the farm a couple times, which means that our farm has been, remains pretty lean and agile, minimal infrastructure, and pretty bare bones. We focus heavily on direct connection to the customer and streamlining and simplifying our processes as much as possible, just to keep it really lean and maintain profit margins and stuff like that. So that's our farm. Is there anything else you'd like to know about our farm right now?
I don't think so for right now. After I give this intro, you can definitely kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts a little bit more, Joel. Thank you.
Great.
So I'm going to give an overview of some of the risks and benefits of having livestock on our farm, and some wildlife topics as well. And then we'll hear from Joel. So just, we're all on the same page. Animals, both wild and domestic, can be a reservoir for human pathogens that can cause human illness. So their GI tract can carry those same pathogens that we can carry. So things like pathogenic E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria monocytogenes is the pathogenic strain of Listeria that can cause illness. And some of it could be light illness and some of it could be more significant, especially for an immune compromised population like a child or someone who might be sick or elderly. So they're also in things like avian species, often carrying Salmonella. So we're not saying that excluding wildlife, for example, is possible completely. Obviously, that would be great if it was, but it's not. So we're going to minimize the risk and minimize the risk when we use livestock as well. So here is an example of some of the pathogens in animal manure. Many of us know Salmonella are often present in avian species. They're often in other species as well, but they are pretty prevalent in those avian species. And there are some other things. Parasites. Toxoplasma is present in cats. Cats are the host for that parasite, and that can be a really significant parasite. That can cause some pretty significant illness in folks. And norovirus, if anyone has ever had noro, it is not pleasant. But viruses are, the hosts are human. So we're talking about bacteria today from animals. So here's some factors to consider when we're talking about using those animal-based composts. Know the source. Where did it come from? If it's from animals, has it been treated? So we'll talk through what that means, when to apply it to reduce the risk, and then storage and handling is another way to reduce the risk. So here's a photo just to get us thinking here. We've got a pile of manure, right? This might be somebody's compost pile that they will put on plants at some point. So if you could write into the chat, how could that manure get onto those, let's say those are green beans growing? What's the risk there? Or maybe there isn't a risk. What do people think? We've got runoff, a big rain event, runoff. Yep. A lot of runoff. Yes, wind is another way. So this is getting us thinking about risks because that's kind of what our food safety is based on, identifying the risks and then reducing them. Wild animals tromping through. Wild animals love a warm compost pile, right? Absolutely. Wind. What's another, I said who, I gave it away. What's another way? Yes, humans could potentially carry that on our boots. Machinery, Ron, absolutely. Yep. So if we've got tractors going over that, let's say there was runoff after a rain and then our tractors came through. So any of us that have livestock on our farms really think about where that manure is sited versus the vegetable fields. And if our tractors are going through, remember that Listeria outbreak in cantaloupe some years back. Unfortunately, quite a few people did pass away from that outbreak, and that was Listeria monocytogenes. And one of the factors there was that there was piles of manure. The tractor drove through runoff coming out of the manure pile, and then it went into the pack shed. They couldn't see it, just looked like water coming off of the tractor or just general muck. But, mud isn't what we're worried about. It's the fecal contamination within that mud. And sure enough, this mud had manure on it from the compost pile. It got into the pack shed where it kind of took up residence. Listeria thrives in these kind of cold, wet conditions that you might see in a pack shed. And it then splashed up onto the post-harvest machinery where it spread onto all those melons going out. So that's kind of what we're preventing with using these practices. And I think most people would say that's a little too close to our vegetable fields, right? So that would be something that we would want to site farther away from our vegetable fields. To be clear, there are lots of different types of soil amendments. They can be chemical, they can be purely physical, or they can be biological. We're talking about the biological ones today, and the risk really is based on where they're from. There are a lot of benefits of using manure in vegetable operations. So we know that some of us apply our own manure-based compost or we buy it from someone else, and they could be good for your soil. So we're not at all saying don't do it, just do it safely. If it's from plants, it's generally going to be really low risk. Remember, what we're thinking about is those bacteria that thrive in the guts of animals, because those are those fecal oral pathogens that also thrive in our guts. Plants are not likely to have those. Sure, is it possible that there might be some on your culls from your pack shed? Sure. It- Probably in a lot less concentration than in a pile of manure. So these kind of things are really pretty low risk, and you really don't have to take any steps to reduce the risk there. If the compost is, or the soil amendment is from animals, then it would be a higher risk because it's more likely to have those pathogens that can cause human illness. So that varies based on the treatment level. So these two things that we see here are treated. This has gone through a scientifically validated treatment step, likely using heat or a chemical process to reduce the pathogens to a safe level. So a treated might be like sustain or composted poultry pellets that we get from Cash and Farm Supply or some of the other options. So those are also going to be really low risk because they've been fully treated. If it's untreated, if it's a pile of manure that your friend gave you, that the farmer up the road gave you, that you pulled out of your own barns, that's going to be an untreated product, and that's going to be the highest risk. That's the most likely to contain those pathogens that could get someone sick. It also includes just aged manure. So a pile that sat there for a few years might look sort of finished to you. It doesn't smell, it's crumbly. It's a good product to add to your soil if your soil does need that, but it hasn't been treated in a scientifically validated way, meaning it hasn't been turned and temped like they would at a treatment facility. Or like you can if you want to follow those timing and temping guidelines. We're not going to go over to those timing and temping guidelines. You will be sent a link to those, but know that there is a treatment process, and sitting statically in a pile doesn't heat consistently throughout the pile. So the middle might be really hot, but the edges might be still pretty cold and cool enough that it doesn't kill those pathogens that might be present on the edge. So that's why we're turning. If you are using untreated, a best practice, if you're using that untreated soil amendment, like the manure from your barn, the best practice is to wait 90 days in between the application of that manure and harvest of the product if that product that you're growing does not touch the soil like a trellis tomato. If it does touch the soil, you're going to wait longer, 120 days between application and harvest. So that's a pretty long time, and that is because these pathogens can persist in the soil, and they have been shown to persist, frankly, far longer than 120 days. So applying in the fall, working it in well, is really the best way to reduce the pathogen load there. If it's treated, if you buy it from that Cash and Farm supplier or somebody else, Sustain, you don't have to wait because it has gone through that treatment process. Or if you do the treatment yourself to those standards. Okay. Any questions on that? Handling, you remember thinking about that big pile of manure and you've got a truck. And if it went through, or if you were spreading it like this, you would not then use that same machinery without cleaning it to haul your vegetables. Many of us don't have different attachments for each use, right? You're going to have many dual purposes. So think about how you operate. Maybe you do all your vegetable tasks first, then you spread manure, for example, and really training your workers. Anybody who's going to be doing those chicken chores, doing handling of the livestock or the manure should do the vegetables first and change boots. Storage, again, that photo, just making sure that it doesn't have a direct contamination possibility. I will say I have seen many manure piles, unfortunately, that are way too close to vegetables or pastures without a significant berm or any sort of grassy area. And the topography is such that the water really will just go straight down into the vegetables. And so that would be a significant risk. Work it in well in the fall if you are using it is a best practice. Putting a cover crop on it is even better. It's been shown that the nice, really, biologically active soil is those pathogens might be more likely to be outcompeted when you've got a good microbial activity in your soil. Okay, that was manure application in livestock. And now I'm going to talk briefly about wildlife, and then we're going to hear from Joel. So wildlife are also animals, not animals that we generally invite into our fields, but they do exist. And we farm in harmony with nature. Many of us appreciate wildlife. It's kind of a reason why you might be enjoying being outside, but their poop can also contain pathogens. So there was an example, strawberry outbreak, and there were deer. I will say when there is an outbreak, there were a lot of deer and deer feces in these strawberry fields. I can't remember the number. There was many, many, many piles per, square, yard or something. So there were a lot. So it's not like a random deer pellet going through. It's when it's really reached kind of a capacity. So know the kind of poop that might be present because then you know who you're dealing with, what kind of animals you have. So knowing what you're looking at can be helpful. Bird might affect a tree crop, tomatoes, kale. They're not necessarily going to impact something that's right low on the ground, whereas fox poop isn't going to affect the top canopy, such as kale or something. So avoid growing produce directly adjacent to those animal areas. It's pretty obvious, but it's just kind of something to think through. If you've got a lot of, you're lucky enough to have that many bald eagles, well, don't put your lettuce directly under there. If you've got kind of high lines with electrical wire, phone, don't put your vegetables right under there too, because there's going to be likely a lot of bird poop. Really keeping mowing as much as possible just to kind of keep those fence lines clear to keep that harborage area down. Do your best to keep the animals out. There is nothing perfect here. Obviously, we know, and we're going to hear from Joel kind of what works to keep, and then from everyone else, what works to keep out animals. It has to be changed a lot. It has to be a lot of movement, and it has to be something that they don't expect. We've got the floppy guy down here like this. Some people use those like in an orchard setting for a really high value crop. It obviously needs electricity. We've got the scary head, which may or may not deter people or animals, would probably deter people. Exclusion is often the only thing that works for deer. So all sorts of different fences. There's other deterrents. It really depends on scale. If you've got 3 apple trees, you might be able to hang some Irish Spring soap. If you've got an orchard, that's probably not going to happen. Noise, people use different kind of noise things, Halloween things that can scare animals. If you've got pets, do your best to keep them out of the produce area. Certainly don't invite them in. And if they do get in, they have to be taught to stay out. That's the growing fields and the kind of wash pack areas as well. Their poop, although we love them, their poop can contain pathogens just like all the other animals. If people are coming to the farm, tell them to leave their pets at home. They don't need to bring their pets onto the farm. They're likely going to just run all around. Make sure to have a hand washing sink if you do have animals and you're letting people interact with those animals. All right, that was a quick overview from me. So Joel, we have some slides in here from you, just kind of more on your farm. So I will advance and you can just kind of tell us about your farm and then some of the ways that you farm with livestock and reduce those risks.
Great. Okay, so as has been said, we do farm with livestock. So we have cattle and chickens, hundreds of chickens. We do about 1,200 cows, sorry, 1,200 broiler chickens on pasture over the course of this summer. And we have 300 egg layers, and we're probably finishing 12 to 15 beef animals. So there's a fair amount of livestock. You can see there's a map of our farm there. And on the top right, you can see the pasture pens. We raise our broiler chickens in Salatin style pens, and you can see them kind of cruising across the pasture there. And you can kind of see the change in green color, and that's due to where animal impact has been happening versus regrowth. So the white dot on the upper left is our egg laying chickens, and they're way over there. And the cows are somewhere in there as well. The garden you can see on the bottom center-ish, all the beds there. And that's where the garden is, and that's actually the highest point on the property, that and up where the house is. So any kind of if there were any kind of runoff or something like that, it would not be traveling towards the garden, just because it's the highest point in ground. And that was, there's a lot of reasons why the garden ended up there, and high ground is important for drainage generally, which is important for vegetable production generally. So it ends up there. Um, the animals there's pretty much a tree line between the animals and the garden. As you can see, there's just trees between the pasture and the garden. So there's no real clear sight lines between garden and pasture. Um, and I guess that's good. There have been maybe a few times in the early days when the cows would get out. Um, but even if they get out, they're unlikely to make it over to the garden. I guess at some point they might, but they would have to be going very close to the houses and dogs and all kinds of things. They're more likely to travel somewhere else. So we've never really had a problem with the animals getting into the garden. And that's mostly just because we manage them in a totally different area. There's not sight lines, there's a fence and then a tree line and all of that keeping them out. So completely distinct. The winter housing for the animals is on the mid right hand side. There's a high tunnel you can kind of see in the trees there. And that's where the animals, like the egg laying chickens, are there in the winter time. So they're in a high tunnel all winter long. And again, still pretty far away from where the garden is. And they're on deep bedding. So that's one place where we would have bedding buildup. But we don't have manure piles. And to me, that's part of our management strategy anyways, because I feel like best animal management has uh, the manure being spread on the pasture because the animals are out on pasture all the time. So we're not having piles of manure building up just because even in the winter when we've had cattle, we unroll the bales or stage the bales out in the pasture and have them eat out there, spreading their own manure the whole time. So we're never having a buildup of manure in one place, anyways. And that's for logistics and reducing labor for us, the farmer. But it also means that we don't have these massive piles of potential pathogenic material building up anywhere on the farm. So it's kind of baked into our management practices not to have big piles of manure anywhere, regardless of the fact that it's apart from the garden and downhill from the garden. Um, so that's that. We do buy organic compost that is professionally made. We use a lot of compost, and that comes from Purple Cow Organics in Wisconsin. It's pretty far away, and we ship it in, and the shipping is expensive. It comes in a semi. I mean, we are bringing in multiple semis of compost every year, and those get dumped slightly downhill from the garden, just again because it's the high ground. Um, but it's fully composted and it's organic certified and everything. So it's a it's not raw manure. It's been aged. It's been temped. It's got all of those things done to it, and we get a soil test on it. Like because we're doing such a high level of intensive management of vegetable production, I'm very picky that all of our fertility inputs be really precise. They be professionally made, and I know what I'm putting on my garden. We're testing our soil all the time and being really careful about all the different balances in there. And so I believe again that that's the best way to grow vegetables is to get really high quality inputs. And I think it's worth the money to get quality, consistent inputs that are professionally done and then put those on there. Even though we could potentially theoretically generate a lot of manure and use that as our fertility, I think that's going to cause issues in the production, imbalances. I'm not going to be able to manage it as precisely as a professional compost maker. And so I'm going to come up with an inferior product, which means an inferior crop downstream from there. So even though we have a lot of manure coming out of our animals, it's all going into the pasture. And then we're buying professionally made compost and chicken manure, pelletized chicken manure and stuff for the garden on the other side. And I think that's worth it. Um, Here's a slide of our four enterprises: eggs, vegetables, beef, chicken. I don't know if there's any questions about those generally, but like I said, the animal products are all on pasture. Their fertility goes back to the pasture. The vegetables are almost entirely separate. I mean, they are entirely separate. They're produced on in a different field, and they generate enough revenue to buy their own fertility inputs. And those are all professionally made inputs that we're bringing in and storing. Even if we have a pile of compost, it's under a tarp because I don't want that leaching. We talked about leaching as could be an issue if that's leaching down into the garden. Well, I don't want my any of my compost or anything to leach into the garden because that'd be bad for the vegetables, but I also don't want it to leach out of my pile because that's my fertility. So I want to cover it with a tarp anyways so that it keeps that quality. So in many cases like this, the best practice is best for the health and safety in the vegetables, but it's also best for the manure to keep its fertility. So we're putting a tarp over any pile that we have. We're keeping it downhill. We're minimizing any kind of leaching that's happening anyways. We're applying it in the fall before the crops, even though it's completely finished compost. It's not raw manure. It's still getting applied in the fall. And that's because there's a lot of microbial activity that happens in the wintertime to build and prepare that fertility that happens in cold temperatures. So getting that compost on the ground in the fall allows it to kind of embed itself into the biology of the soil all winter long, and you get a better return on that fertility in the next spring. So that, again, that's best practice to do that. It's also from a health standpoint the best way because you have that time gap between the fertility input and the crop being there, raw manure or compost. It's better for the crops and for the soil to do it in the fall too. So best practice all around is to put it on in the fall and to not let your piles leach out, and to, in my opinion, purchase the highest quality inputs that are professionally made and balanced. That's our farm team 1 year. I've got another daughter since then. So there's 5 daughters, my wife, Megan, in pink. And then we have a crew of people. Some of them are full-time. We usually have 2 that are year-round full-time employees. And then the other ones come for seasons, either as apprentices for about 9 months or as interns for 3 months. So that's kind of a somewhat revolving cast of people. And then I'm on the left there in the white shirt. So separating livestock from vegetables. Again, they're in 2 separate fields. They don't really see each other. You can't see them from each other's locations. But our fencing also, that's another thing. Good fencing is important if you don't have that berm of trees in between your garden and your pasture. But I think it's also important to say that cows getting out is a problem even if there's not vegetable production happening nearby. Like, you shouldn't be having your cows get out because that's a management headache and that's stress and that interrupts your day and it's not very efficient. And there's lots of reasons why, as an animal producer, regardless of the contamination possibility, you should have management practices in place that ensure your cows stay where they're supposed to stay so that you can move their paddocks, so that they're grazing properly, so that they're gaining weight properly, so that you have minimal disruptions in your day. So good fencing is important, period. It's important for the animals and it's important for them not getting into vegetables. And that doesn't even have to be a very expensive thing. We have all, we don't have any permanent fencing on this whole farm. We're lean, we're very low infrastructure, and we kind of like build out of our profits in a debt-free kind of way. So we just didn't have the cash to put in a very expensive tens of thousands of dollar fence around all of the pastures on our property. So we have fiberglass posts, some T-posts on the corners, and we have 2 strands of electric fencing. That's our perimeter fence. And that's not a very heavy duty fence, but a good electric fence is a psychological barrier for cows. And if it's hot and you keep it hot all the time, they will learn to respect it and they will stay in. And so it's far more efficient and effective for us to maintain our fence and make sure it's very hot all the time, and the cows stay in just fine. They don't get out anymore. They got out in the first year or 2 when we were still working out some kinks when we just moved here, but they don't get out anymore. And that's just because we've set in place some rhythms of management to make sure that our fences are hot all the time. Somebody checks the charger at least twice a day, morning chores and evening chores. We mow under it. We know how often we need to mow in order to keep the grass dragging the charge down. We have a charge checker to make sure it's over a certain number of joules or volts or whatever every day. I mean, it's easier to check it consistently and then make sure the problem is taken care of than it is to go chase cows and try to get them back in because they got out again. And so diligent management to maintain those fences is what keeps the cows in and therefore out of your vegetables, but also just keep the days flowing smoothly. So very simple fences, 2 strands of electric wire, a really good charger, really good grounding rods. Invest in the charger and the grounding rods to make sure that your charge stays really hot, and then your cows should stay in. And again, that's important for managing, keeping animals out of vegetable areas, but it's also just important for managing the animals. Keep them in, keep your fences working properly. So you can see in that picture, there's a reel. We spool up the fence as we move the paddocks, kind of a normal paddock moving kind of system. But yeah, the fences are very minimal. There's our compost. Again, I said it comes from Purple Cow Organics in Wisconsin. When it comes, you can see we actually lay out a tarp, and then we have the truck drive up to it and dump on the tarp. And there's a little bit of technique to making sure that the truck dumps all on top of the tarp. This is just a silage tarp, which we use for oculation in the garden to suppress weeds at times. But then I don't know if I can exactly explain very efficiently how we make sure that the whole pile is on the tarp. It took us a few tries to get it right, but the truck backs up, he dumps a bunch, then he moves forward, dumps a bunch, moves forward, dumps a bunch because it's a big pile. And we're able to kind of roll up and then unroll the tarp as he goes to make sure that the whole pile is on a tarp. So there's nothing leaching down into the soil. And then we're putting another tarp. We're folding up the edges of the bottom tarp up onto the pile. And then we're laying another tarp over the top and then laying pallets or whatever to keep that tarp down. So the compost pile has a tarp below it and above it. There's no rainwater getting onto it. There's no wind. There's no animals digging into it. And that's, partly born out of, I guess, like food safety, but it's mostly like I want to get my biggest bang for my buck out of that compost. I spent a lot of thousands of dollars on it. It's got a lot of important biology going on in there. I don't want to lose that. I want it all in my garden. So until it's spread on the garden, I'm keeping it, from wind and rain, erosion, and yeah. I mean, we put in an extra driveway so that they could dump it in an efficient place near where we want it and where we can work with it. And we're getting multiple semis a season. And we're just ready when the truck comes, and we make sure it's dumped where we want it and where we need it, and then keeping it there. So that's how we store it. That's where it comes from. When is it applied? We used to apply it in the spring just because that's what we could get to, but we've since switched to doing it in the fall. I've learned about soil fertility and soil health and soil biology, and I've learned that applying in the fall is important for the biological components to really work their way in and prepare the fertility for the next spring. There's a lot of cold temperature biology activities that need to happen slowly through the winter for best fertility in the spring. So now we do it in the fall, and that's best if it's fresh manure. But we're never really dealing with fresh manure because I just don't think that that's the best way. And this is all professionally made, well balanced compost that I get a soil test on. I mean, we're very strict about managing our soil health because nutrient density is important to us. So we're getting soil tests, we're doing sap analysis on our crops, we're balancing the minerals, we're bringing in lots of compost. I'm just very careful that we're getting really high quality, well balanced stuff. I would be very uncomfortable putting our own bedding or something on the garden just because too much carbon is going to tie up my nitrogen, and my leafy greens aren't going to grow and mature on time, and too much of this is going to imbalance that. Balanced soil brings crop health, and crop health brings disease resistance and bug resistance and nutrition for our customers. So we only want the best in our garden. We have at times tried to compost our vegetable scraps and our bedding together. We've used a Johnson Sioux bioreactor, which I believe is a really great way to make compost, but we have not dialed in that process enough to make me feel comfortable using it in the garden. I mean, some of it did get up to temp and the piles, got up to temp and stuff, but we just never put it on the garden because I'm not comfortable putting anything that's subpar on the garden. So we can use that like in flower beds somewhere else, or, around the house on shrubs or something. But we've dabbled a little bit, but until I'm extremely confident with it and I could get a soil test on it and know exactly what's in there, I'm not going to put it on the garden just because I don't want to mess up the soil in the garden. Totes cleaned regularly, stored upside down when clean. Yeah, so we harvest into those gray bins and the green ones, and then once things are washed and fully cleaned from the field, they're going into those blue flip tops. So you can see the two kinds of bins that we use, and those stay basically separate. Like the gray ones go out into the field and they get dirtier and they have dirty produce in them, and then the blue ones have clean produce in them. And so gray ones are, we're not really mixing those. I mean, sometimes it is because it's a farm and real life happens, but generally speaking, it's dirty in the gray and then cleaned into the flip tops, and then that's what goes into the cold storage and stuff. We clean them out afterwards, just spraying them down mostly with water. We have a scrub brush so we can like get into the corners if we need to. I personally think that, if I see junk or gunk in the bins, that's kind of gross. So we don't want that. So we clean them out. So it's usually after harvest day. We do all our harvest on Mondays. And then we usually don't have time because it usually goes right to the end of the day. But then Tuesday morning, usually somebody's assigned to go clean the wash stand, and they're just completely cleaning the wash stand and all the bins and all the totes that are done and being used. So everything gets sprayed down with a hose with a spray nozzle on it. And then there's a brush to brush into the corners and get it all pretty spick and span. And then they dry out in the sun, and then they're stacked up and put up on a pallet and ready to go next time clean. And that's the whole wash stand. It gets sprayed down and swiped off, and vegetable scraps removed and everything. Our packing area is just in a high tunnel. So this is a farmer's friend high tunnel, and we built a wooden deck floor for the interior so that nothing's out down on the ground. I mean, when we got started, we had no money, and we were on. I mean, I think the first year we just did it kind of out in the open beside the field. We'd set up a little like net table and. But then as the farm grew, we just kind of got a little more sophisticated and a little more sophisticated. And this is what we're at right now. But it's still extremely lean and extremely flexible and movable. Shade cloth on the high tunnel so it doesn't overheat in the summer. We can put an end wall, but in the summer we want that airflow just to keep it dry and open and not from overheating. So the ends are open in the summer. We have rolly carts you can see there, and that's for ergonomics and efficiency. So we can set up workstations that don't require extra steps and extra movements. We wash in those big 150-gallon tubs, the stock tanks. We have hoses up in the rafters that come down for filling and spraying. We have hose guns for each station. It's very simple. We have you can barely see it there, but between Sam and the first rolly cart is actually a trash can on casters. That's the compost. So all the compost is going, like scraps are going into a bin, and that can be wheeled away and dumped or taken away and emptied out. So it's all pretty efficient, pretty simple. And water drains away. The floor is, gets swept. There's a push broom laying around. People are sweeping it off here and there. We just kind of keep it pretty tidy. The rolly carts with the racks, there's not junk on them. Everything's draining out and through and out and under the deck flooring and away. Water all drains away. We have some tubes that take the water away from our stock tanks and just disperse it out into grass further away from so shouldn't be piling water. There's a few places where there's a puddle on the edge here and there, but it's mostly dry and up off of the ground because you're either standing on those pallets that he's standing on or else you're all the way up on the deck. How often and when do you empty the tanks? Those get emptied probably several times throughout the day. I mean, again, if the water's dirty, I don't want people dunking my food in dirty water. So we don't, we just empty them when the water gets dirty. And that really just depends on what crop has gone through it. A lettuce mix that is not dusty and dirty is not going to dirty up the water very much, but carrots with dirt all over the roots is going to totally soil the water. And we're mindful of that. We've cut bigger holes in the bottom of those tubs so that they can drain a lot faster. And then we have float valves on the water lines that lead right to the tank. So you can drain it pretty quickly with this big opening on the bottom that, again, has a tube attached and takes the water away. You can flop down the drain cover and then start the water running and walk away, and it will fill all the way up and stop with the float valve. And so that's nice and makes it a little less time consuming to empty and refill tanks, which is important. We don't have high pressure water or like high gallons per minute water, so we can't just stand there and watch it happen. That's just too much time. So you learn the tricks of your little wash stand and what to do. And okay, if I drain this now, it'll be clean for the next crop, and I can walk away and go harvest carrots while it's filling. And you set those little rhythms up. We usually have one person who's in charge of the wash stand. We call them the pack shed princess, and they kind of make sure that those rhythms are happening. And we have a couple different stations that you can work at so that you can be filling and emptying one while another one is working and keep the flow moving. But yeah, I mean, you can see there, it's open, it's airy, it's dry, it's sunny. I mean, it's not always dry, but it dries out quickly. And that feels important to me, that it be able to dry out. We don't want it to stay stagnant. We talked a little bit about pathogens, like where they grow. And if you just think about a petri dish and what it requires for mold and stuff to grow, you want like warm and moist conditions for stuff to grow. You don't want it too cold. You don't want it too hot. You don't want it too dry. You don't want it too wet. You want kind of that middle ground for things to grow. So we want to keep it from being that. We don't want warm, moist, damp conditions to linger anywhere. So we want it to dry out quickly. We want it to be sunny and airy, and it feels cleaner, and it is cleaner. But it's a simple structure. It's not that complicated. And you can spray into all the cracks. There's no corners. There's no places where stuff can build up, or dirty areas underneath, or dark places that you can't see to clean. This is all like you can see everywhere in the pack shed. You can see under the tubs. You can see under the roller carts. Those totes are all out of there, stacked on a pallet in the sun. Um, like the only place that's like a crevice is probably in that washing machine on the left that's hacked to be a salad spinner. So down inside the drum of that is like the only place that's kind of like dark and not very accessible, but you can just tip that on its side and spray down in there, and there's no bottom, so the water all runs out through there. So you can clean in there as well. And that's part of the person who cleans the wash stand. There's always some amount of cleaning happening during the process of the wash stand pack. Like we maintain a cleanish environment just because that's more efficient, and the wheels can move and roll things around, and it's not gonna impede our flow. And then after we're done washing and packing, or after we're done washing all the produce, we pack all of our CSA boxes in there. And we have a customizable CSA. So that's a pretty complex little flow that we do. But again, it has to, like, we basically have to clean the space in order to do that. So it gets swept out, it gets sprayed down. We pull the rolly carts out and set up some folding tables real quick. So we have to keep it clean because we have like a somewhat cramped spot. And in order to get maximum efficient work out of it, we need to keep it kind of tidy. But dirty things like dirty bins and stuff that we don't have time to clean at that moment are just kind of chucked into the grass on the outside to the left out that end. And then the next morning, somebody's spraying down all of those and drying them and stacking them up. So the interior keeps clean just because we need it to be clean to work efficiently.
Joel, one of the
Yeah.
participants would like to know how well those carts hold up to rusting. Are you able to use them for multiple seasons?
Yeah, there's a little bit of rust showing up on one of them, but they've been around for many seasons, and they're only just starting to show a little bit of rust in some spots. And there's two different cut types. We have some from Global Industrial, and we have one from Uline, maybe a third brand. I got a couple different ones to kind of test that exact thing.
Oh, Joel, we're kind of losing you, I think.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, maybe you should turn off your video.
Okay. Stop video. Is that better?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Um, the carts are holding up pretty good. There's a tiny bit of rust on some little spots that are on the edges, but like the bars themselves are not, there's no problem there. There's no rust there. It's just a few little welds on the edges or something that have started to show a tiny bit of rust. Um, there's more expensive ones that you can get that are like stainless steel or something like that. Um, we don't have those most expensive ones that would probably be the best for resisting rust. But they've been with us for many years, and there's like I forget. I could look it up for somebody if they needed to know, but there's like powder coated ones, and there's stainless steel ones, and there's chromed ones or something like that. And some brands are resisting a little bit better than others, but they're all pretty good. I mean, they're very clean and cleanable, and the tiny bit of rust that's in the little corners is like just starting after several years.
In the follow-up email on that list of links, we could include a link to these carts.
Yeah, I think there was another question that came in, but I missed it.
It is about your source of water. So do you have a
Oh, yeah.
well? Um,
At this time, we run everything off of the house well. So there's a well for our house, and the gallons per minute and the pressure are normal residential levels. It's not very intense. And that's what we run everything off of, just because we can't afford to put in a huge well. And that does pose some problems sometimes. There's just not enough water to like run all of our sprinklers at once or something like that. And it's irritating. We probably this year will be investing in increasing some pressure and some tanks in order to have a little bit more water, but it's workable for our scale and what we're doing. We've figured out ways to make it work.
are you testing that water?
No, I do not test it, but I'm pretty sure it comes through our water softener in the house, so it's probably balanced.
For bacteria, you can test annually for generic E. coli. So it's probably fine. I assume it's a, well-functioning well. That's a nice deep well. But it is a good idea if you're using the water on vegetables just to test it for E. coli. So we can make sure that the follow-up email has links to those kind of testing resources as well. Is there anything else about this that you weren't able to share previously, Joel?
The chickens, we use that electrified netting fencing to keep them in so they stay near their coop. And again, that's important for keeping animals out of vegetables, but it's also important for your chickens. That's predator protection, and it's management, and it's being able to move them from paddock to paddock. So fencing is important regardless, even if you don't have vegetables. So we use that fencing. It's sometimes a challenge to keep it hot when the grass gets taller, but you do what you need to do in order to keep that hot because it's important for many reasons. These guys again are out on pasture. They're not near the garden, and they in the winter they go into a high tunnel, a simple high tunnel, just like that wash stand, except it has end walls that are better, and it has chicken wire around the inside to keep them off the plastic. But it's deep bedding, so we're piling up a lot of wood shavings just to keep the bedding fresh and dry and clean and healthy for them and to absorb all the ammonium. And that's best practice for chicken health and best practice for any kind of runoff or manure management anyways. Form of storage for the produce, we have a trailer, an enclosed trailer with a AC unit and a cool bot um, cut into the wall and spray foamed interior. And then we've covered all the spray foam with food grade, I forget what it's called, FRP, food restaurant panels or something like that, food grade something panels. So it's like those white panels that you see in other walk-in coolers on top of the spray foam. So it's a insulated trailer with a AC unit and a cool bot, and all of our totes and everything go in there for cold storage, and then we can tow that trailer down to the cities so that everything stays cold right up till the time that we're putting it on a doorstep or handing it out at a drop site. And we're kind of outgrowing that trailer, but we're just cramming it in for now until we have cash flow to build something better.
And then Joel, a question with the chicken in high tunnels over the winter, do these get moved so that the bedding is then worked into the pasture?
No, it builds up and we scoop it out with a skid steer. We rent a skid steer for one day in the year and scoop it all out. And we spread it out on the grass or on our flower bushes around the house or something else where we want mulch, but it never goes into the garden at this point. We've done a few trials on Johnson Sue bioreactor compost making. But we have never used that in the garden just because I'm not super excited about the results being perfect. A few of them, we've done a bunch of them, and some of them got up to temp and composted properly. But even so, we didn't use them on the garden just because I'm hyper careful about what I put on the garden. It is a fair amount of bedding that is being established, but it's also high in carbon because I want the bedding to be highly absorbent of all the manure for the chicken's health and comfortability and cleanliness for eggs and stuff. That means that the carbon ratio is way high on their manure. It's not composting or heating up under them. And so I would definitely not want to ever put that bedding into my garden because it would be so high in carbon that it would absorb all the nitrogen and I would get terrible growth on my crops. So there's like best practice for the bedding means that it's not an ideal fertility input into the garden. And so we have to just break that chain right there. At this point, we're not going to be like closed loop, full circle animal bedding into the garden. That's really cool and ideal. And I definitely like kind of wanted that when I started farming. But the more you dig into the fine tuning of fertility for optimal crop performance and stuff, the more you realize that that is a really complicated thing to pull off on a small scale. And you basically would need to be an expert on vegetable growing and an expert on compost making and an expert on animal management and an expert on soil science and an expert on so many things. Also, we have zero machinery on the farm. We don't have a tractor or a skid steer or any kind of equipment. So turning those piles and making those piles and stuff is not realistic for us right now. So yeah, we don't have a tractor. We don't even have a pickup truck right now. This is all very human scaled, very lean, and that limits some things like turning large piles for us. These are the meat birds, and they're in Salatin style pens on pasture. As you can see there's 8 of them going at once in the height of the season. And again, we're moving them every day so that they're clean, so that they're comfortable, so that the chickens are healthy, also distributing the manure optimally over the pasture. And the animals and the animal management is what is producing the fertility for the animals' environment. Animal waste is pasture fertility. It does not become garden fertility. We just don't cross that line. And we find that that's best for the pasture and the animals, and it's best for the garden. But yeah, those birds aren't getting out. And again, that's good. They're not getting into the vegetable areas, but it also means they're protected and their manure is being laid where I want them. There's also no big piles of manure. And that's good because it's spread over the garden or over the pasture, and I don't have to spread manure or anything. So it's best practice for animals and best practice for the ground.
How often are you moving these?
Every day. Every morning, all those pens get moved. There have been times when we've even moved them twice a day once they're big and they're putting down a lot of manure. But generally, it's once a day. I'm sorry, I missed that question.
Yep, that's it. No other questions.
Okay.
A lot of these you already got to, Joel, so I will see if there's anything you didn't get to. Any mistakes made, bad fencing, others mistakes that you would pass on?
Yeah, fencing, I would say, is if you're going to use minimal fencing like we do, I would say that discipline is what's required, but it's worth it. A lot of people, it's difficult to keep their fences hot enough to keep the animals in, and so they have animals getting out all the time. But that's the kind of thing that will burn you out and make you stop farming. So you should do the disciplined work of checking your fence in the morning and checking it in the evening, or putting it for a worker to do and putting it on a checklist so that people remember, and have a little tester to see what the charge is so that you're really clear that it's very hot, and it will be worth it. It's definitely more peaceful to get into the habit of checking once a day than it is to periodically be chasing animals all over the countryside to get them back in. So get your fence hot and put a few more ground rods in, buy the bigger charger, and just make sure that you can do that. I mean, my charger is set up in a place where you can see the little green light from the house. You can see that it's going or not, and you can get visual fence alerts. You can get these like things that hang on the fence with a little strobe light so you can see that it's going or not. You just invest in that stuff so that your fence is hot all the time to keep the animals in, because that's worth it even if you don't have vegetables nearby.
How
So we
about
did
deer
make those
fencing,
mistakes. We didn't
Joel?
always have super hot fencing. The farms on the East Coast that we managed always had animals getting back, and I like swore I would never do that again. Mistakes, I would say goats are a mistake because they always get out. So that's just a personal thing. They're so hard to keep fenced in. Somebody asked about deer. We also do a 3D deer fence. So there's this type of deer fence that's like 3D, and essentially you have two fences next to each other. And deer have their eyes are on the sides of their head, which gives them panoramic vision. But it also means that and that's for predator protection, so they can see all directions at once, more or less. But it also means that they have very poor depth perception. And so because they have poor depth perception, they're hesitant to jump over something if they can't very clearly see their landing zone. And so you can take advantage of that by having one fence that stops them. It's just like a hip height single strand of electric fence and we usually bait it with little apple scented things. And then behind that, about 3 feet, is another fence with a low strand and a high strand. And if they try to go under the first one, they'll run into the low strand that will shock them again, and that freaks them out. Or they will potentially want to jump the first strand, but they see some other strand back there waving around. We have used that highly visible black and white braided cord there, and so they will not jump as readily because of that second fence behind the first one. And that works pretty well, but it's not perfect. Deer will get in if they are desperate. So we have had that around our garden um, for years, and it is effective all during the season at keeping them out, because there's plenty of forage around for them to get at. So they're not like they don't need to get into the garden because there's plenty of other food for them to get to. In the late fall, when everything else is dead and we still might have like some kale or something in the garden, that's a point when they will start getting through that fence. And so that is a trouble that we've had, is the really late season kale or something. They'll get in there and start eating that. And then, so that's a problem, but we're usually basically done with our season at that time. And so yeah, we just haven't solved that particular moment in the season when they want to be in the garden. We have dogs on the property, and the dogs help keep the deer away generally. We're in the garden, almost all day, every day. So there's a lot of animal presence around and human presence around. And then there's that 3D deer fence keeping them away. Um, but yeah, there's that place where they can still get in the late season. Um, we've trained our dogs not to go into the garden, more or less. There's times when they're like chasing a rabbit or something and they'll cut through the corner. But they're generally trained to stay out of the garden beds and out of the garden, definitely not in the wash stand. They know that they can't go inside that tunnel, even though the ends are open. They just get in trouble if they step inside. So they stay at the edge and wag their tail and look. Um, Cats, we do have cats on the farm, and the cats are impossible to train, as you know. So they are around, and we actually don't mind them in the greenhouse because, especially in the spring, because we will have mice trying to get into our greenhouse to dig up seeds and stuff. And so having cats in there at that time actually reduces the rodent presence. So I think I'd rather have a cat than rodents. But that's another area where like we're not perfect. There is some animals around. Um, but yeah, training dogs is one thing. We have used that electrified netting fence that we use for the chickens. We have put that up along the garden on one edge that has the trees nearby because we were getting rabbits in the garden, and so we did put that up for a while, and that kept the rabbits out. Um, and that was on mowed ground. So the grass was short underneath that netted fence, and we could keep it pretty hot and keep the rabbits out from coming in from that tree line. Um, so that's another option, but take some management to keep that fence hot and keep those rabbits out. But other than that, I think it's always somewhat of a struggle. We also manage another farm, so that's my home farm, but we have another farm that we manage for an outdoor education center, and they have a problem with like ground squirrels coming into the garden, and that's a really hard problem. They have trapped them. They've had like professional trappers come out and try to get rid of them, and that's just really hard. I hope they never come to our garden because they dig under, and it's very difficult to eradicate them entirely, and you can't stop them with a fence. So I have no solution for that short of like putting out a lot of poison or something. It's just like really hard to deal with them. And we haven't solved that one.
Great, thank you. I think the last thing here is just to talk about the kind of order of operations when you are doing chores related to the animals,
Yeah.
boots or clothes or things like that.
Yeah. So we do harvest first thing in the morning. Um, our person who does the animal chores is going to come from animal chores, but he knows that you need to wash up and clean up before you come into the deal with people's food. And that just kind of makes sense to us. And so washing your hands and cleaning up is there. I don't know if it's food safe or not, but often people will be barefoot in the garden when they're harvesting. So shoes off that have been out in the pasture and in manure. Um, but I don't know if that's technically a good idea or not. Um, so he washes before nobody else is really dealing with the animals before they're going out to harvest people's food, and that's generally the case. It's like the animal chores person should be cleaning up before they go into the garden. Nobody else is really dealing with the animals before they go out there. So that's just basic hand washing stations and stuff. Equipment, there's no really crossover. The garden tools are the garden tools and they stay in the garden, and pasture stuff is pasture stuff. We don't use equipment and tractors that are driving between those two enterprises. Um, I mean, we're very low equipment anyways. We find that most things can be solved with a management and a better process, and we don't really need equipment and a lot of stuff. So there's nothing. And then we stage a lot of our tools out where we use them in the workspace. So garden tools are in the garden and they're staged there and stored there. And anything that's used in the pasture is, on the mobile coops or out in a blue barrel nearby, or, it's dedicated tools to dedicated spaces. Topography already talked about. Um, Even like packing. Somebody asked me this in the other webinar. When we are packing all of our orders, again, all of our orders are customizable, so they're all different. Our CSA boxes are not, standardized. So people shop online through our online store, and then on Monday we're printing off big pick lists and harvest lists and pack lists, and then we're printing off invoices, and we're packing up all those orders. And somebody is going and doing all of the meat and eggs packing of orders separately. So they pack all of that stuff into coolers, or in the freezers out in the garage where all the freezers are. And then they're transitioning to the garden, and we're packing all the vegetable orders and putting them into the trailer. So then at the drop site, you're grabbing, there's like two parts to somebody's order if they've got both things. You're grabbing their vegetables out of the cooler, and you're grabbing their meat and stuff out of the back of the van. And that's a list at the drop site of who gets what. That there's like some logistics to work out there, but it's still it stays separate all the way till it's handed to the customer. Our sales platform is Local Line. So Local Line is a farm-centric sales platform for managing orders, and it's worked pretty well for us.
Thank you. Is there any other questions briefly? Drew, if you could launch the post poll, I would appreciate it. And people can put any questions that they have in the chat. I think we did answer. Oh, Adam wrote in and let us know that FRP, yeah, fiber reinforced plastic. Carmen did ask about the cleaning of the cooler and kind of preventing condensation buildup.
Yes, that is something that we should probably do more often. It gets done a little bit here and there, but we rarely get in there and like scrub it down throughout the season. So yeah, maybe we should improve how often we get to doing that. But it's like a few times during the season, and then freezes over real good in the winter time. I know that.
That's pretty typical, and just looking for condensation buildup, especially if you've got condensers and fans, condensation can happen in the heat of the summer, especially. So
yeah, I would say that's a pretty common issue.
Definitely.
And difficult to overcome.
It is difficult, yep. But yeah, you were right on saying you don't want that water building up, that condensation, especially you wouldn't want that dripping directly onto the produce, which we have seen.
I mean, the only thing that I can think of off the top that we do for that is that we always park the trailer at a very slight inclination so that it is all draining out the door. There's no pooling in corners.
Oh, that's a great
idea. Nice, but that's only, there's no standing water, that's for sure. There's still like damp corners, and
well, I mean, you also want humidity in a cooler. So
yeah, that's true.
It's more the dripping directly on, because that listeria can build up in that condensate.
Yeah. And all the produce is in those flip tops, so that's enclosed as well. Just
right.
I mean, it's not a perfect seal or anything like that, but things are closed. There's not open bins of produce in there.
Well, excellent. It is 10:15. I'd really like to thank Joel for your time this morning. Really thoughtful, insightful comments and descriptions of your farm. It sounds wonderful. So thank you so much. You got a lot of kudos in the chat too. So we really appreciate your time preparing for and delivering this with us this morning. And
yeah, thanks. Feel free to reach out if you have other questions. You can find my email. Our farm is Abraham's Table Farm. And
yep, we will go ahead and send out the link. Give me a few days to get this video, and everyone will get this video as well. And then we'll also send out a link to the page that will have like where to find those carts and maybe your high tunnel. Joel, that was a really nice high tunnel for your packing area.
Sure.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.